The UFC BJJ Road to the Title Season 1 has officially come to an end, and with that, the UFC continues to take steps to attempt to dominate the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu market. However, the UFC is seeing some pushback, and a lot of that pushback is being led by one man, Craig Jones. Guys, this is Ffion with PDMA, and today we are going to go over this ongoing feud between Craig Jones and the UFC and what it means for the future of competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And before we get too into it, I just want to explain exactly what I'm going to do. So Craig Jones has a unique way of airing his grievances.
The UFC.
And while I personally am a big fan of the way that Craig combines airing legitimate grievances and shenanigans, I understand for some people it might get a little confusing between, okay, what exactly is he talking about here? What exactly is he trying to say here? And then what exactly is online performance? So hopefully I, a much more boring person than Craig Jones, can help separate that. And before I do that, if you guys are fans of the world of competitive jiu-jitsu and want more news on the topic, click that subscribe button. That helps me out a lot. Now let's get into it. So for those unfamiliar, Craig Jones has a long list of competitive jiu-jitsu accolades, but for the purposes of this video, we are going to talk about the Craig Jones that is the founder of the Craig Jones Invitational. And the Craig Jones Invitational is a Brazilian jiu-jitsu competition that was founded directly in response to a lot of the grievances that Craig had with other professional Brazilian jiu-jitsu organizations, namely ADCC. And one of the main factors that he was sort of rebelling against by starting this was the issue of grappler pay. And I think that's important to note because as we go on, we do want to point out that Craig, in a lot of his decision making, all of the decisions he's made, whether you agree with them or not, have really been to benefit the grappler. And of course, on the other side of this feud is the Ultimate Fighting Championship, the UFC, the premier MMA organization in the world that is now looking to branch out into other combat sports. We actually see them not just going into BJJ, but they're going into places like boxing to try to expand the company. And this UFC BJJ Road to the Title and the UFC BJJ 1, that's not actually the UFC's first foray into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. In fact, they've been putting on the UFC Fight Pass Invitationals now for several years, and I actually made a separate video about that. I'm going to link here if you're interested in learning more about that. And so one of the big grievances that Craig has been very vocal about is this issue of exclusivity. It seems like the UFC wants to take all of these grapplers and force them to sign exclusive contracts so that they can only compete with the UFC. And as far as I know, and I could be wrong, so correct me in the comments if I am, but the UFC itself hasn't actually come out and talked about what the actual stipulations of these contracts are. A lot of the information we get are from the grapplers they signed, like Mikey Musumeci, Ffion Davies, and several other people who have discussed sort of what's on these contracts. And it seems like Craig's big issue with this is he wants grapplers to be able to have a choice. He believes in almost this like free market situation where you as a grappler are free to compete for this organization and this organization and this organization to maximize your benefit in grappling. You could, as a grappler, potentially create a scenario where, you know, this organization wants you to compete and this organization wants you to compete. So now you have the power as the grappler to decide which organization you would like to compete in. And there is one grappler I did want to talk about who kind of got wrapped up in this whole thing, and that is Ffion Davies. Now, if you remember, several months ago, Ffion signed a contract with the UFC and recently competed at the UFC Fight Pass Invitational in a match against Adele Fornerino. There was a controversial decision. She ended up winning. We're not going to go into that in this video. But if we go back to this match Ffion had on the Fight Pass Invitational, around that time, Craig, believe it or not, got a little vocal on social media and talked about how Ffion was making personal decisions and selfish decisions that don't actually benefit jiu-jitsu or women's jiu-jitsu or whatever. They just benefited her. Ffion came back and said, hey, as far as I know, my contract lets me compete in CJI. So for some reason, there is this disconnect where Craig seems to have thought she couldn't compete in CJI, and Ffion made a post and said that she believes she can. And while I'm not privy to any insider information on this, I think I might have an idea of why there is this disconnect there. So actually just this morning, Craig made a series of Instagram story posts, and one of them said that he was approached by the UFC to coach opposite Mikey Musumeci. For whatever reason, that deal was not able to happen. But he said after that is when UFC BJJ athletes were barred from competing at CJI. And so that led me to wonder, maybe since Ffion's contract took place before this negotiation happened, maybe that's why she doesn't remember hearing anything specifically about CJI, but it might be a reason that Craig believes that she can't compete in CJI. Either way, it doesn't seem like Ffion will be competing in CJI this year, but I thought that was interesting and that there might be some sort of disconnect because of that there. Again, I'm not privy to any insider information, but I just thought that was interesting. And it's not like Ffion's the only person Craig's gone back and forth with throughout all of this. He's surely had some back and forth with Mikey Musumeci, which that's always a fun one. But that's not who I want to talk about right now. I think I'd rather talk about Andrew Tackett. Now, if you are a UFC BJJ conspiracy theorist, like some people out there are, you might think that it's pretty convenient that the UFC BJJ Road to the Title had Andrew Tackett in a bracket with a bunch of people that, Andrew Tackett could probably handle, and that maybe the UFC wanted Andrew Tackett to be the face of that division. I don't know, maybe some people think that. Who knows? But regardless of all of that, I think Craig did notice that, you took this guy, you signed him to an exclusive contract, and he was a very, very big part of the inaugural CJI event. And based on an interview Andrew did a couple weeks ago, it seems like, while we don't know the exact details of his contract, he won't really be competing anywhere else, at least anytime soon. And I think the issue here that again goes back to what Craig was talking about, in that he wants there to be a competitive marketplace for grapplers. He wants grapplers to be able to say, oh, well, this organization's offering me this, and this organization's offering me this, and I'm going to do what's best for me. So now, while we have one organization signing exclusive contracts with some of the top grapplers in the world, we are really limiting the type of free market that these people are going to be operating in. And it's not just a bad thing in Craig's eyes for the grapplers, but it's also bad for the organizations. I mean, the UFC's model was very, very similar with MMA, and it's no secret that the UFC is obviously the top player in MMA, but I think Craig is also worried about other organizations kind of going the way of organizations like Strikeforce, where this big UFC comes in and just slowly chops up these smaller organizations. And another area where Craig seems to have some grievance is the format of the UFC BJJ. And when I say format, I mean a couple of things. I mean the rule set, and I also mean kind of the overall appearance. So let's talk about the obvious one. The not pit. The bowl. And possibly my favorite part of this whole feud between Craig Jones and the UFC was when the original commercial for UFC BJJ Road to the Title came out. There's just one part of the commercial where Andrew Tackett just goes,
"It's rounded."
I don't know. I personally found that so funny because I think it really does show that this beef isn't just Craig complaining. That to me was the UFC taking a pretty obvious shot back at Craig. And I think what they were doing with that was going, oh, see, we didn't copy you. Ours is different. Ours has rounded corners. Yours just has corners. I thought it was hilarious. So yes, the mat space looks very, very similar to CJI. And now a lot of people, when this first happened, that were kind of on the UFC side, or at least that were trying to make a counterpoint to Craig Jones, were saying, well, Karate Combat has a pit too. But then Craig was quick to answer that and said, hey, I worked with Karate Combat and was very upfront with them, and we have a deal that is why I have this pit. The UFC just kind of did it. I think the UFC actually did come out and say, no, ours is much different. We have these rounded corners. And now whether they were saying that because they actually believe it or for legal reasons, I have no idea. But they did point it out. So the other grievance with the format that Craig has is the UFC BJJ has a rule set that includes 3 5-minute rounds with a 10-point must scoring system. If you're not familiar, the Craig Jones Invitational has 3 5-minute rounds with a 10-point must scoring system. And now I think when a lot of people hear that, they say what the UFC said. They said, hey, MMA forever has had 3 5-minute rounds with a 10-point must scoring system. And actually, Craig, you took that from MMA, and we, the UFC, are the premier MMA organization on the planet. Craig Jones's counter argument to that is, yeah, but nobody else took it and put it into grappling. I was the first person to do that. So this one is a little bit more murky. Now, even though I haven't really been giving a ton of my opinion throughout this, I will say, I think they jacked it. Of course they took it from the Craig Jones Invitational. Where else would they get that idea from? Now, there's a lot of claims from the UFC that, no, we've done this before, and you know, it comes from MMA. Maybe. But to be honest with you guys, the UFC has kind of done some things to lead me to believe that they wanted to take some things from the hyper-successful Craig Jones Invitational, including this format. And the last real grievance that I see Craig Jones having with the UFC, this one's a small one, but I just thought it was kind of fun to bring up. And when Craig and Mikey Musumeci were going back and forth, Craig did bring up that the UFC is sort of overselling Mikey Musumeci as the most successful American grappler of all time. And, you know, whether you believe he is or isn't, I suppose there is a debate there, but I just thought it was fun because Craig, even though it was sort of in a joking fashion, did point out that Gordon Ryan could also be argued to be the most successful American-born Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu competitor of all time. And the UFC really, really wants us to believe that, no, it's Mikey. And so now, what does the fan base think of all of this? And now, it's kind of a weird part of the video to make because if you're watching this, you are the fans, so feel free to let me know what you think in the comments. But based on the people that I've been speaking with and the things that I've read on the internet, I think most people are sort of in the Craig Jones camp here. However, as I mentioned in my last video, the one thing that's hard to argue with is the fact that there were some really, really fun matches on this UFC BJJ Road to the Title and now on UFC BJJ. Other than that, though, I think Craig has a lot of good points, and I think the fan base is still leaning with Craig. However, we have to understand that this is just the UFC getting started. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of resources that they can put into this fight. And I'm very, very curious to see where it goes because it's also not the first time Craig has picked a fight with a large organization, and in the past, he's won. So why does all of this matter anyway? Why does it matter that Craig Jones and the UFC are going back and forth and arguing with each other? Well, I think it actually is very important for the future of jiu-jitsu. Don't forget, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, submission grappling, whatever you want to call it, is on an upward trajectory. Who knows where that's going to end? Who knows if it'll get as big as MMA? I don't know. The point is, it's on an upward trajectory. And what that means is not only are more eyeballs coming in the sport, but with those eyeballs come more money. And the fact that an organization like the UFC, who is one of the top marketing organizations in the world, and one of the premier professional sports organizations in the world, is taking this hard of a stance at trying to seemingly corner the market on Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that means a lot for the future of this sport. You know, does Jiu-Jitsu turn into something like MMA, where there is one real organization who crowns champions? I mean, I understand that there are other organizations out there that do MMA, but let's be real here for a second, guys. Nobody is arguing that the heavyweight champion or the, you know, welterweight champion of ONE FC or PFL or whatever is the best fighter in the world. It's pretty obvious when you say who is the best person in the world at this weight class. This is the UFC champion. And so is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu going to turn into that model? Are the best people in the sport going to have to compete in the UFC, BJJ, just to prove that they're the best? Or is this going to shake out a little bit more like boxing, where there's titles all over the place and it's kind of a mess? Or is it going to carve its own path? And I think people like Craig Jones are working really hard to make sure that BJJ has its own path. You might disagree with me on that, and you might disagree with Craig, but I am very much in the camp of I want these grapplers to be able to make their money, and I want there to be competition in the market. I think that is good for everybody. Now, you can hear me be a hypocrite and say, I'm a huge MMA fan, and I really like watching the UFC because it ensures that I'm watching the best people in the sport fight the best people in the sport. So there is that point. I still do think that Craig is a little more right here, but this isn't about what I think. Nobody cares what I think. What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments below how you guys feel about this matter. Are you Team Craig? Are you Team UFC? Let me know if you guys are enjoying this video. Again, please just click that subscribe button. That helps me out a ton. Lets me know what kind of videos you guys want to see. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.